Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Belgian Tavern Club of Southern California's June webinar. Tonight, we have a very special guest, Jean Dodds, who many of you already know from having seen her or been to Hemopet. Jean is a widely published, renowned research veterinarian. She holds 25 patents, has authored or co-authored more than 150 research articles. She has been in Southern California for many years and has conducted most recently, if I'm not mistaken, a rabies challenge, which demonstrated that rabies titers exist for much longer than the state law of 3-year vaccinations require. Tonight's presentation is on heartworms, flea, and tick prevention and the consequences of, and the dangers rather, of using some of the prepared preparations that have been on the market for a number of years. I ask that everybody keep their microphones on mute until the question and answer period later on. The video or the presentation is also being recorded and will be posted to our website within 24 to 48 hours. And with that, let me just turn it over to Jean Dodds.
Thank you very much, John, and welcome everybody to this presentation about the preventatives for heartworms, fleas, and ticks. There's a lot of information that has changed now since about the year 2000, when many new products have come on the market. And as you might expect from any kind of chemical that the body is exposed to, that there can be adverse reactions. And the question is, what are they? Are they serious? And what do we do about it? The presentation I'm going to have tonight is based on a paper that was published in August last year in Veterinary Medical Sciences by Valerie Palmieri and a group of us. There are 3 veterinarians on a special panel convened to look at this issue. None of us were paid, we were all volunteers, and I'm the corresponding author for this paper. Now, we have updated the data from this paper, which ended in 2019, and we've updated the data to 2021, so April actually, just last month ago or so. But I cannot show you those new data tonight because a paper is being submitted next week detailing the new data. And if I present it tonight, I can't publish it. So I can talk to you about it, but I can't show you those slides. And for that, I apologize. We can always have another update later, John, and do the new data. Okay, we all know about fleas and ticks on pets, and of course, some of the mosquitoes are there, as you see in these pictures. We have the flea on the left, the engorged tick on the right, and then the combination of them on the left. And we hate them, of course, because not only do they bother our pets, but they get onto us as well, and they cause itching and scratching and redness and bad news. So what we're going to talk about first is a class of compounds called Isoxazolines. And believe it or not, about 20 years ago, these compounds were generated by DuPont. And they generated them to be antithrombotic agents for people. In other words, drugs that prevented microclots in human beings. And they did that by inhibiting a particular coagulation factor. Now, what happened, because they were anti-clotting, some people had excessive bleeding and red blood cell lysis because of it. So again, here was a trade-off 20 years ago where you had a potent antithrombotic agent to compete with warfarin, the rodenticide, and it caused bleeding. However, after this period, the chemists at DuPont figured out that these also inhibited parasites. And so the isoxazoline products have been sold all over the world. In fact, 2 of them are the largest money makers ever for Big Pharma in veterinary medicine. So obviously the incentive to not use them when they're so widely used worldwide has been difficult for us to overcome. So they're mostly efficacious and safe, and the publishers of these compounds have said you can even give it to 8-week-old puppies. And there actually is a paper that shows that it was safe to be given to 8-week-old golden retriever puppies. So the point is, it's not that these products are unsafe. The point is how many pets react adversely to them, and can those adverse reactions be more than just itching? I mean, could they actually cause death and harm? So let's go back a sec here, what we have. Okay, so the adverse effects are believed to be rare despite millions of doses given. However, post-marketing adverse effects have continued to increase. Now, they kill the insects, the parasites, by affecting their nervous system. And one of the first things that the companies that made these products said was these compounds are insect specific. They have no effect on the host. Well, that's turned out not to be true. So not only do they kill the fleas and ticks that we're trying to kill in the heartworm, but they also can kill and affect a significant population of pets. They're more selective for particular receptors in fleas or ticks than they are for mammals, including humans. In other words, they act more effectively on fleas and ticks than on mammals, the host, including ourselves. They bind to a particular gated chloride channels in nerves and muscle cells, and they block the transmission of the nerve signals in these insects. However, they say it's insect specific, and I've said to you that, oops, now why does that change when I haven't changed it? Okay, well, never mind. Okay, so in a Danish spaniel was reported in 2019, 24 hours after receiving one of these products, to have the product was Fluralaner, and Fluralaner's trade name is Bravecto, and it is the most widely used of all of them. And this particular puppy had transient neurotoxicity. He had generalized ataxia. He had monoclonic jerks. In other words, he was jerking. He had tremors of the head and the body, had muscle twitching, and he couldn't swallow. Now, that was what happened to him. Now, it was relatively transient, so the dog did recover. However, we've had fatal liver necrosis and bleeding in a young boxer dog 2 days after it had the same product, Fluralaner, which is Bravecto. And this particular boxer was perfectly healthy, went into a veterinarian in Canada for a checkup and was given this product. 2 days later, he bled to death from fatal liver necrosis. And this particular case and others is involved in a class action suit ongoing now in Quebec. Seizures and aggression have been reported by other isoxazolines, Afoxolaner, whose trade name is NexGard, Sarolaner, whose trade name is Simparica, and the newer version, which is a combo, Sarolaner Plus, which is Simparica Trio. So it has 3 things in it. Lotilaner is Credelio, and then we have Fluralaner, which again is Bravecto. And we have the new issue with collars, such as Seresto, which has recently been associated with nearly 1,500 deaths in dogs using these collars. And there's an FDA, USDA warning about that. By the way, just so you know that the FDA regulates parasiticides, but the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, regulates pesticides. So the EPA regulates the Seresto collar, but the FDA regulates these other products we're talking about. It's intense itching and scratching is seen, especially on the face, and you have dysbiosis of the bowel. In other words, the healthy bacteria in the bowel do not work properly. The harmful bacteria overgrow, and you get diarrhea, constipation, gas, and bloating. In fact, some of the animals are so severely affected in their GI tract that you can hear their gas bubbling in their stomach when they're lying down in the evening when you're, say, watching TV together. So what happened was we decided, a group of us, and there were 10 of us, 3 veterinarians, to develop an independent survey called the Jake survey after Valerie's German Shepherd dog, Jake, who is still paralyzed from side effects of Bravecto. So we decided to get reports from veterinarians and pet owners worldwide, and that was the subject of our publication. However, the manufacturers were not concerned about this. All these reactions were occurring, and the manufacturers said, well, that's just a few in millions, even if they die and are aggressive, whatever. The issue was compounded, however, by the fact that on the package label, none of these companies actually talked about the potential serious adverse effects. They did not appear on the label until the EPA and the FDA required that they go on the label, and that has been relatively recent. In fact, for the isoxazolines, the warnings were on the label in Canada before they were in the United States, because after all, there are very few people in Canada compared to the population in the United States. And the company was able to convince the government that they had to sell their existing 250 million doses before they would put the warning on the label. The warning is now on the label, and most of those labels have a white background with silver print in 7-point size. And many people haven't even read them because, after all, they've used these products for some years and they didn't realize the label changed. So the FDA announced in 2019 about the potential adverse reactions. And that was after April 2018, when our group actually presented our data to the FDA in a special hearing. Adverse reactions are underreported, and the public is often unaware of how or where to report them when they see them. And in fact, there's a recent estimate that only 1% of the adverse reactions are actually reported. So many people see them, they don't know what to do about it, they forget about it, or they change products. So the recent label changes were made from 2018 in Canada and 2019 and forward in the United States. However, new combination parasiticide products are still approved by the FDA and the EMA. And the EMA is the European Medicines Agency that controls all these products in Europe, including the British Isles. Now, this summary is up to 2018. We have the data now until April 2021. And it shows you now that nearly 60% of the respondents said their dog had a flea treatment, and 48% of them said they used an isoxazoline. Which one did they use? Bravecto, nearly 69%, NexGard, 26%, and Simparica, which was relatively new at the time, 5.4%. Did the animal experience a reaction? 66.2% said yes. 36%, however, said no. And people who were unsure if it was or wasn't were about 8%. So about 2/3 of the people that use these products recognized an adverse reaction. And if you want to be Pollyanna, you could say, but 36% of them didn't. What were the reactions? Bravecto caused 87% of them, NexGard 67% of them, and Simparica 61% of them. Now, the data from now on up to 2021 have much higher reported adverse reactions, including death. So what do the side effects say in 2018? NexGard can cause these side effects. Bravecto can cause different side effects, including seizures. And Serralana, Simparica, also causes seizures. And this is from the Freedom of Information Act from the FDA. That's how we got this information originally. Now, what did the FDA report with 32,374 adverse reaction reports until January 2019? NexGard caused 2.4% deaths and 6.9% seizures. Bravecto caused 2.5% deaths, about the same, but fewer seizures, 2.8%. And Simparica had 3.2% deaths, which was higher, but it hadn't as many cases now. And 20.5% of the dogs had seizures. And we now have Simparica Trio, which is the 3-way Simparica product that causes more adverse reactions than the one by itself. Credelio and Comfortis reports were not available at the time of analysis in 2019, but we have them now. Now, this is the European Medicines Agency, and they had, and that was only through September 2017. We have NexGard, 39,000 adverse reaction reports, by the way, with 5,556 deaths and 6,272 seizures. I don't care what you say, that's an astronomical adverse reaction rate for serious adverse reactions. NexGard had 9% seizures, Bravecto had 18%, Simparica had 55.1% seizures, Credelio 27.6%, and Spinosad, which is Comfortis, 24%. These data were also shown in a different program, that's why you have that as well. Now, what did the FDA say? Overall, they had 32,374 cases. This is up to 2018. Death was 2.47%, seizures 5.34, shaking and tremors and ataxia 6.87, behavioral change 28.62%. The behavioral change includes unprovoked aggression of the pet guardian. This is totally unacceptable. Cognitive changes, neurological changes, 2%, and muscular balance issues, in other words, ataxia and lack of good coordination, nearly 5.5%. And they've been broken down by the three, Bravecto, NexGard, and Simparica. Here's more FDA adverse effects. Skin problems and itching, 23.17%. Internal bleeding, 3.43%. Anemia, quite low. Vomiting and nausea, nearly 41%. Not eating or drinking, 14%. And diarrhea, 12.34%. And this is through September 2017. And I can tell you for the data through 2021, all of these issues are much higher in numbers, as you would expect, because more animals have had the product. What about the European Medicines Agency? Again, you have death overall, 22.7%, seizures 30.25%, ataxia and tremors nearly 7%, behavioral issues, that's unprovoked aggression, agitation, and anxiety, 7.5%, loss of motor function, stiffness of the limbs, inability to walk, 7.5%, and loss of balance, 1.4%, basically. When you continue with the European Medicines Agency, respiratory issues were 5.5%, vomiting 26.25%, lethargy with no energy 20%, loss of appetite 19.4%, and diarrhea nearly 16.2%. All of these numbers have increased in total numbers, and the percentages of adverse reactions are similar, a little bit higher, and of course the number of adverse reactions is going to be higher because the total number of animals given these products has increased. Now, in our survey, we had the three different products, Bravecto on the left, NexGard in the middle, Simparica at the end. And again, there weren't very many Simparicas because it was a relatively new product for us at that time. And you can see the reactions varied from panting to decrease in no appetite to itching and scratching, vomiting and diarrhea, weight loss, drinking more than normal, and then relatively few, the other ones. What about death and neurological symptoms? Death from these three agents was nearly 15%. Seizures and convulsions, the same, 15%. Ataxia, instability, and imbalance, a little bit, basically the same. And shaking and trembling, 17%. So we have serious adverse reactions going on with these products that people are generally, not involved. So how many animals died? Seizures and convulsions, 30.77% died. Ataxia, instability, imbalance, 41% died. Shaking and trembling, 35% died. So the number of death and seizure adverse reporting events by the European Medicines Agency was 7 to 10 times higher than those that were reported to the FDA. And as I told you, our analysis of the FDA indicates that less than 1% of people actually tend to report things in our country, whereas in Europe, it's very common and encouraged for people to report adverse reactions. And so that's one of the reasons there's such a large discrepancy. And by the way, the isoxazolines have recently been withdrawn from the market in Europe. Reported responses from our JAKE survey for death and seizures fell in between those of the FDA and the EMA, but allied more closely with the EMA. In other words, we found in our survey of 2,751 cases that we had a higher rate of reporting than the FDA. So the public needs to be educated about all the types of potential adverse events. And clinical veterinarians need to recognize all potential adverse events. And I have to tell you, even in Southern California, amongst conventional veterinarians and holistic veterinarians, people are still prescribing these isoxazolines, especially Bravecto, even though we've told them all. It's very, very alarming to me. I don't know why this keeps changing. I haven't touched it. Okay, so we need to accept that manufacturers will likely refute the reports. I mean, that's what you'd expect them to do. It's an urgent need for public and veterinary practitioners to report these events rather than not doing that, because we'll never get good federal data otherwise. So what about the European Medicines Agency death and seizures with age? The dogs that died, and there were 1,603, and were reported by their age, less than 1 year, 1 to 2.9, 3.4 to 9, 5 to 7.9, over 8, and then there were some where the age wasn't reported. Less than 1 year, 10.48%, 1 to 2.9 years, 6.92%, 3 to 4.9 years, 8.9%, 5 to 7.9, 17.8%, and older dogs, 44.79. That's telling you that as these animals have received these products and continually, as they get older, they have other concurrent diseases going on with aging, and more adverse reactions occur then with these parasiticides. Now, with dogs that had just seizures and didn't die, you could see again, there's an increasing number of animals that had seizures as they get older. And that is exactly what you would expect as older individuals have other concurrent diseases. In the JAKE survey, we had basically similar things. The FDA serious adverse event reports you can see compared to ours. So death was 3.2% for the FDA. It was 4.55 in our studies. Seizures was 20.5% for the FDA, but we only found 11.14%. Shaking and tremors were 41% with the FDA and 29.6% with us. So there is some difference in reporting data. What about the, if you look at them all together and you look at the EMA, and we, at the bottom of this events with death and seizures, we also include lotilaner, that's Credelio, and spinosad, that's Comfortis. And you can see there's high adverse death reactions and seizure reactions with both Credelio and Comfortis. What about the package insert? Oh my goodness. So we'll look at Bravecto, Fluoroliner, and you can see our survey data, and you can see what the package insert says. Decrease or no appetite, we had 28%. They report 6.7%. We had diarrhea, 22.7%. They report 4.9%. You can just go down the whole thing and you can see. And yet, when you go to death, seizures, shaking, ataxia, weakness, etc., until recently, these were never reported. Now, if you look at NexGard, we have the same situation. All these serious adverse effects that we found were not reported. Most of the reports in the package insert were significantly lower than the survey data that we published. Okay, now here's an interesting thing. The European Medicine Agency actually looked at up to 2017 when the reactions occurred. And there were 7,074 individuals in that with the three products, Bravecto, NexGard, and Simparica. And you'll notice that the reaction rate is high to start with. It goes way down, and it starts to climb up again around day 14, and it peaks about 50 days after the products are given. So there's a initial reaction, then there's a acceptance of it, and then there's a secondary peak of reactions, except for Simparica. So these reactions were overall for Bravecto and for NexGard. Okay. So what is the summary of what we've talked about so far? We need to avoid, and the label warnings are now updated till 2021. You avoid spinosad, that would be Comfortis or Trifexis. Afoxolaner, that's NexGard. Fluorolaner, that's Bravecto. There's a new version of Bravecto, by the way, that's a combination Bravecto, like Bravecto Plus. That has the highest rate, by the way. I'm just looking at these 2021 data. Bravecto came on the market in 2014. There were 43,602 adverse reactions reported, and this is the FDA, 1,533 deaths. With Bravecto Plus, which is fluorolaner plus moxidectin, introduced in 2020, there are 77,459 adverse reactions and already 4,753 deaths. So it's a problem, clearly. Sarolaner is Simparica, and the new one, Simparica Trio. Lotilaner is Credelio. Selamectin is Revolution. And the new Revolution Plus, my friends, is Selamectin plus Simparica. So just remember that the original product you had may be relatively safe, but the new combo wombo with the extra stuff in it is clearly not. So if you were going to use Revolution, you would not want to use Revolution Plus because it also has Simparica. Then we have moxidectin with imidacloprid, that's Advantage Multi. So we have Advantage 2, Advantix 2, and we have Advantage Multi. Remember, when you're dealing with multis, these are meant to make everything go away and have a problem, including the pet. So I feel very strongly about these combination things. Let me go back here. Okay. ProHeart 6 and ProHeart 12 are the 6 and 12 month equivalents. Moxidectin is Coraxis, and milbemycin oxime lufenuron is Sentinel. And there's a huge increase in reactions now to Sentinel, which is pretty interesting because if you remember, lufenuron was originally marketed as Program for fleas. They now combine it with milbemycin oxime for heartworm and the other things. And Sentinel is supposed to kill everything these days. And we're getting serious adverse reactions, including aggression with Sentinel. Now, what about the serestrel collar? And that's imidacloprid. There's a typo there, 1D, by the way. Recently associated with seizures, deaths, and unprovoked aggression. As you know, it's been reported to be by the FDA and even the USDA to cause these reactions now. Okay, so instead of being negative only, let's talk about generally safe products. Now, Frontline is a product that has been considered generally safe, and it's a combination of fipronil and piriproxyfen. Now, believe it or not, just this week, a major review has come out of Japan on the adverse reactions to fipronil, including mice, humans, dogs, and cats. So the latest publications say that Frontline, because of the fipronil in it, which is used in agriculture, it's used on lawns, it's used everywhere as a parasite control product. So check on fipronil, and it's in Frontline. Imidacloprid and piriproxyfen is Advantage 2 for fleas, and Advantage 2, excuse me, for fleas and ticks. Those are generally safe. Indoxacarb is Activil. And by the way, that's misspelled, Activyl, sorry. And Activil has fipronil in it also. And Nitipyram is Capstar. And many cat people like to use Capstar. Now there's an interesting dog tag that you can wear around the collar of a medium to large size dogs. And the website is here, www.catandogs.net. For heartworm prevention, we use milbemycin oxime, which is the original Interceptor, not the Interceptor Plus, or ivermectin, which is the original HeartGuard and Iverheart, not the Plus version. You could still get the original versions if you especially order them. So what do we have as alternative natural supplements? Most important thing for fleas and ticks is to keep the environment cleared where fleas and ticks can hide, and they hide in plants and bushes and any kind of shrubs and places where you have where you cut the shrubs and plants and leave them on the ground. They can hide there. Use a flea comb, that special comb that will take it. Now, if you've got a heavy coated dog, that may be a problem for some of the Belgian breeds, right? But if you've got a short-haired dog, it's very easy to use a flea comb and to see the fleas. If you don't see any live fleas, you may see flea dirt, which means that the dog has had, or cat has had fleas. You can do that by putting a white sheet or a white piece of paper, depending on the size of the pet, underneath the animal when you brush it. And you'll see the tiny specks that look like pepper, which are flea dirt. Bathe the animals often with natural herbal repellent shampoos. You can use peppermint, you can use neem, you can use soaps. Now, we don't want to bathe them too often to dry out the coat, so you've got to balance that. But maybe you can bathe them and then use a conditioner. Excuse me. Essential oils, now some good ones, Kin and Kind. Wondercide is great, and Wondercide comes in various flavors. Please, please avoid, why this is changing, it must be on some timer. Please avoid Wondercide with rosemary in it, because rosemary is a neurotoxic herb. So you avoid rosemary, oregano, fennel, and sage because they're neurotoxic. So please read the labels carefully if you're using essential oils. Vetri Repel is one. Peppermint, cedar, lavender, citronella, eucalyptus, diluted tea tree oil. Remember, tea tree oil can be really toxic if it's used neat without diluting it. So dilute it at least 1 in 10 times if you can use that. Lemongrass, but read labels carefully. Use flea and tick wipes. Use human grade, not brewer's grade, diatomaceous earth on the pet, on your rugs, on your carpets. You can even put it in their food, but make sure if you do that around the house that you sweep and vacuum up the excess, because diatomaceous earth is very dusty, okay, because it's made up of little shells. And so it can cause serious dust issues if the pets are, or God forbid, an infant is on the ground where you use it or on a carpet and is breathing it in. You can use food grade brewer's yeast and garlic. It has to be food grade now, not brewer's grade. And an example of a company that has a product is called fleatreats.com. You have to rid the fleas in the home. You need to wash everything, especially your pet beds, your blankets, and your carriers that pets are in. And a 15 to 20 minute dry in a hot dryer, 15 to 20 minutes in a hot dryer will kill adult fleas, their larvae, and their eggs. Vacuum the house regularly. Pay attention to dark corners and to shadows. Steam your carpets, floors, and furniture if you can. Try to use natural flea control products, such as I mentioned before, Wondercide, Flea Busters, and the human-grade diatomaceous earth. Rid the fleas in the yard, mow the lawn, and trim overgrowth on hedges and bushes. Remove dead leaves and twigs from your flower beds or under bushes. Use nematodes. You can actually use nematodes. And you can use flea-repelling plants like lemongrass, rosemary, and sage. But remember, rosemary and sage are neurotoxins. So be very careful if you have an animal with seizures or one that's prone to seizures. So the conclusions now for our formal presentation today was that isoxazolines inhibit killing activity through the effects on the insect nervous system. However, prior reports showed that fluoroliner, that's Bravecto, had no inhibitory action on the channels of rats. However, fluoroliner is stated to be a potent arthropod-specific inhibitor. But the FDA and EMA adverse reaction reports and our JAKE survey evidence clearly demonstrated that the neurotoxic toxicity is not arthropod specific. And we had 3 different data sets that I shared with you tonight. Post-marketing serious adverse effects are much higher than the investigational new drug submission studies stated, and I showed you some of those data. Pre-approval investigational new drug studies are used only a small number of animals, and they did not show neurotoxic serious adverse effects. And you know, when you do pre-approval studies and clinical trials at a manufacturing level, you're only required to have a relatively small number of clinical samples tested. And that's done specifically because the power of observation for relatively rare adverse events, even if they are seizures, aggression, and death, will not be revealed by a small number of test animals. Higher frequencies of these events are noted these days once the drugs have been, once the drugs have been commercialized and given to much larger populations. So data suggests that notable differences in reporting of adverse effects in the US versus European and other territories, and I explained the reason for that. It may reflect the cultural trends and or procedural methods for reporting them. And those in Europe are clearly different than they are in North America. Regardless, national and international post-market safety survey data and summaries indicate an immediate need for continued cross-species studies and a critical review of product labeling by regulatory agencies and manufacturers. These drugs had more serious adverse effects than those reported in the package inserts. The FDA and other agencies worldwide need to change their criteria for what is defined of adverse events. We recommend that. More definition is required that clearly states what would be needed for future clearances of this class of drugs. And I must tell you that there's one product now seeking approval for licensing and use in the United States, and it's called Exalt, E-X-H-O-L-T, and is used on the surface of chickens in the rest of the world to kill their insects. This product gets through the chicken skin into the chicken carcass. We need all of us to try to prevent the FDA from, or EPA, depending on who would be clearing it, to approve Exalt for use in the United States of America. So we want to use natural alternatives whenever possible. And I'd like to end the formal presentation by this lovely slide of the dog on his caregiver's back saying, "If I had my life to live over, I would have found you sooner so that I could love you for longer." So let's all remember that our companion animals give us unconditional love, and we need to be sure that we do that in return and be aware of things that could cause adverse effects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean. Those are some sobering statistics that you offered. In fact, if you would leave that last picture up, that would be wonderful. Before we, if you have questions, use the chat. If you have questions, use the chat at the bottom of your screen, and then so that we don't get people stepping over each other. I will say from my own personal experience, Jean, the nematodes, let me see if I can pronounce that correctly, the Stenorema carpocapes worked wonderful. They worked terrifically in my yard for as long as I used them, I had no fleas in my yard. But of course, all of us go to dog shows, and no matter how well we take care of our dogs, no matter how often we bathe them, they are going to pick up fleas, if not at shows, and certainly just walking around in the neighborhood. Let me ask the first question. Where do we report adverse reactions?
Okay, they're reported to the EPA or the FDA. You just go on your search engine, like Dr. Google, and ask them how to report adverse reactions to drugs or whatever, to the FDA and to the EPA. EPA is for pesticides, okay, like the collar. FDA is for all the other things we talked about today.
Okay. I think when I post the video of this webinar, I will also post links directly to those two reporting sites.
Great.
But if anybody has had any adverse reactions at this point that they're aware of and they wish to post them themselves, just use Google. Google knows all. Does anybody have any questions?
I think Bruce had one, John.
Oh, Bruce?
He wanted to know what the safe heartworm products were. We prefer to use milbomycin oxime, that's Interceptor, preferably the plain version, not the plus if you can get it. Or we use HeartGuard ivermectin, the plain version rather than the plus version.
There's a question from Lisa. What are your thoughts on the on Frontline losing its efficacy and or perhaps the fleas developing a resistance to it?
Well, depending on where you live, resistance is developing. For example, in the Mississippi River Valley, many people feel that Frontline doesn't work anymore. And so they're using Trifexis, for example. The only concern I have, Frontline has been on my list of things you can use, was this latest paper that came out about fipronil. And what it does is it causes memory problems, emotional disturbances, and failure of cognition in dogs and cats. So that's a little concerning if you have animals that are doing performance work, for example, or they get older where you've got some cognitive dysfunction and senility going on. How do you know if these products are causing some of it or if it's just aging? And you saw the data where the older animals had more reactions than the younger ones.
I have another question. Is there any difference between topicals and those that are ingested?
Actually, there isn't. But one of the problems, there's the new issue of the spot-ons, for example, the topicals have had a lot of adverse publicity now, particularly because of the collar issue.
Sure.
The problem is with the topicals, you can have other animals, especially cats, where they can be highly toxic, and people and infants that are touching these animals before the products are perfectly dry. And so the question is it safe to use a topical when you can have a chewable? And then the question is, if it's chewable, does it have some kind of special flavoring in it? If your animal has a food intolerance, it can't have it.
True.
You know.
Nikki, if you would unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask your question, I think it would be clearer that way.
I was asking about Advantage. Is there still plain Advantage made, or is it only Advantix and
No, you only use Advantage 2 or Advantix 2. Advantage 2 is fleas only. Advantix 2 is fleas and ticks. The other one is Advantage Multi, and I would not recommend that one.
Go ahead, Nikki.
No, that answered it.
Okay. Regarding the
question is about counterfeit products. There's a huge issue now about counterfeit products. But you know what bothers me about that is we have all the counterfeit products being touted for testing for SARS-CoV-2 and testing for vaccine reactions to COVID-19, et cetera, and our whole world is filled with counterfeit products. And so what you need to do is make sure the product you get is one that is registered and licensed, and you can tell that when you order it. or you should be able to tell that when you order it. If it's a cheapy one online with a no-name label on it, don't do it.
There's a question about dosing. Of the safe-to-use products, do you feel that they are as efficacious if one uses less than the recommended dosage?
You know what? I don't think using less than the recommended dose is wise. However, if you have a dose that says it's for, I'm just making up a number, 15 to 25 pounds, and your pet is 26 pounds, that doesn't mean you get the 26 to 50 pound dose. You know, common sense would be there's not much difference between the dose required for a 25-pound dog or a 26-pound dog, even though the package label may put it into a general category. So again, you have to use your common sense. If I had a 26-pound dog, I would probably give it the 25-pound dose, depending on whether it was topical or chewable, and maybe a smidge more, you know, but certainly not the 50-pound dose, because that's too much. Now, the other thing you should realize is that some of the heartworm preventatives have been shown to last as long as 45 days, milbemycin oxime being one of them. So the question is it safe to give them for 45 days? Well, the problem I see with that is many people forget, and they like to give their product at the beginning of every month so that they can remember. You know, it's like many things we have in life that you give once a month, right? So if you're going to give it every 45 days, you've got to mark your calendar so you don't go 46 days. That's too long. So again, many people that are very careful and mark their calendars carefully or have a bell ring or something, they can give it for 45 days and it will sufficiently protect the pet.
Gene, I've seen some recommendations on a every other month ivermectin schedule. The thinking is that the heartworms are not sufficiently developed within that period of time that it would cause any adverse reactions to do a every other month dosing schedule. What do you think about that?
I don't think that makes any sense. I think we're playing with fire. You know, the heartworm may not be perfectly developed to protect, but it's still growing and it's still doing something in the body. So please don't do that. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Question on heartworm med. So puppies don't have to be tested for it. They could be given HeartGuard or Interceptor up to 4 or 5 months without being tested, or do they have to be tested at any age?
No, they need, if you give them, people in the southern hemisphere areas, give it continuously so they don't have to do that. Remember that the heartworm doesn't start producing filaria until the temperature reaches about 50 degrees, okay? So in the northern climates, some people decide to stop it from November to March or April, okay? But you should test the animal again, because if you give the product when the animal is positive, even though you don't know it, they can die. So you have to be very careful.
My question is, if you have a puppy that say is 4 months old, can they be just given the heartworm, or do they have to have a test?
No, I would test them, because heartworm can usually show up at 5 months, but you know, there's always a variation in the standard curve. There's always the short guy and there's always the tall guy. So you need to be careful. I would not start heartworm with at least one heartworm antigen test that's negative. And it's so easy and it's not expensive.
Tammy, why don't you go ahead and ask your question? I think you know what you're looking for better.
Was that a question?
Go ahead, Tammy. We can't hear you.
Tammy, have another question?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Now we can.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. What a great presentation. On the list that you have, generally safe products, to control an infestation versus on occasion or on a regular basis or control an infestation, you, in your opinion, are comfortable using those products that are on that generally safe list?
Yes. It depends on where you live, where you're traveling, and the availability of the product. And remember, the veterinarian has to prescribe it. So, you know, we have to decide what they carry. And most of the problem with these things is we don't want to use them, and yet veterinary hospitals do prescribe them. As I mentioned, John realizes, even in Southern California, where, you know, the expert is living there, and of course nobody believes her unless you're 100 miles away, right?
Yes.
What they say? An expert's an expert 100 miles away from home, something like that.
So that's good. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm sorry about the typos. Do you want me to fix those, John?
No, I
Or
think,
does it matter?
I think it'll be fine. Thanks. Kim,
Okay.
why don't you go ahead and ask the question yourself? Kim, what's that?
Hey. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dodds. We live in Phoenix, so fleas are almost non-existent here. And the only time we really get exposure to ticks is if we go up to the mountains for some cooler weather. So our risk is really low of ticks unless we visit dog parks or doggy daycare like my dogs do, and have dog friends that have gone to the mountains for the weekend and brought ticks back with them. That said, are the risks of the preventative worth taking when we're at what I consider a pretty low risk of getting ticks?
I think if you've just gone there and you get a tick or two, you're going to look carefully around the head and neck, right behind the ears, those places where they are. And if you find them, you get a proper hemostat to remove them, so you don't leave any of the tick embedded into the skin. And you dunk it in Dawn liquid dish soap. And I'm sorry, tick, but you're drowned. You can squish them too, but I think they're better to put them in the soap after all.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry about that. So for my dogs who don't go up there much, it's probably safer for them to have a small risk of getting a tick-borne disease versus giving them these preventatives.
Yes. That's
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
And just remember, even for things like leptospirosis and borreliosis and those things we worry about, you know, Lyme disease and lepto, you can give doxycycline if you think the animal's ADR ain't doing right. You come back from your little jaunt in the mountains for a day or so, and you think the animal's looking fatigued or not bright and sparky like you're used to. So you just give them doxycycline or ampicillin or amoxicillin, and you give that while your veterinarian's doing a test, a PCR test, to see if the antigen of the tick or lepto or Lyme is present. It's safer to do that, frankly, than to give one of these chemicals.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, if not, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Dodds, for this presentation. I think many of us have heard stories about the dangers of some of these chemicals. I think many of us have tried to find alternatives, hesitant, but now seeing your numbers, it's just astonishing.
Yeah.
You know, it may not happen to our dog, but it could. And having each one of us have lost a dog to old age, we know, dogs, we outlive our dogs, and we know how hard that is. Imagine if it happened to a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. So thank you so much for the presentation. It's a real eye-opener. And we will have this available on our website in a couple of days, just as quick as I can get it up. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you, Dr. Dodds, and good night.
Thank you, John. Be safe, be well, everybody. Take care.